Hello and welcome to the EcoCast. Today's topic is enhancing the human, tools to help address the weakest security link, brought to you in partnership with KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. Thank you so much for joining us on today's special EcoCast event. On this event, we'll be honing in on security awareness with our expert presenter from KnowBe4. We've got a great event lined up for you today. Before we jump into it, just a few things you should know about the event. We encourage you to use the questions box. It's there on the left-hand side of your audience console. We'll be doing our best to answer those questions throughout the event and at the end of today's presentation. We also want this to be a social event. We encourage you to tweet using the Twitter icon on the bottom of the screen, and the hashtag for the EcoCast will be automatically appended. We also have a number of resources available in the Handouts tab from our friends over at KnowBe4. They offer a wealth of free resources related to security awareness, ransomware simulation, and much more. So make sure you check out those resources in the Handouts tab. And then finally, we've got a number of prizes available on the event today, specifically 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. We'll be announcing the winner of those 3 gift cards at the end of today's EcoCast. Winners must be present on the live event to be eligible for the drawings. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. Full prize terms and conditions can be found in the Handouts tab. The hashtag for today's event is ATM EcoCast. You can follow Actual Tech Media on Twitter, and you can follow me as well, David M. Davis. Feel free to subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media social channels on YouTube, Facebook, the 10 on Tech podcast over in the iTunes store, and all of our latest and greatest content goes over on our LinkedIn channel. So if you have to pick just one, make sure that you follow us there. Now, before I introduce you to today's expert presenters, I've got a couple of quick poll questions for you out there in the audience. All right, first poll question is there on the screen, and that is, which of these are you most concerned with when it comes to security? And I will share the results of this poll question with you out there in the audience. I'm curious to see, the audience's take on this. I've made this a multi-select question, so you don't have to select just one. Of course, this is the topic of today's event, enhancing the human, tools to address the weakest security link. And that's exactly what our expert presenter from KnowBe4 will be talking about today. So again, you can answer the poll right there on the screen. Which of these are you most concerned about? And some of them, as you know, are related. The last answer there is another security concern that's not listed. So I'm always trying to improve these poll questions. If there's a concern on there that's not listed, just drop it in the questions box, and I will share it with everyone who's on the event. And maybe we can use that to improve the poll for the next time. Thank you to everyone out there who's joined the event. Again, thank you to, let's see, I see Drew, I see Young, I see Ed, I see Bajes, everyone from across the United States, around the world. Thank you so much for the good morning messages. Of course, we also encourage your technical questions, so keep those coming throughout the event, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end. And with that, it looks like we got lots of responses on the poll. Thank you, everyone. Let me share the results of this with you. And you can see 70% said ransomware. Of course, always top on our mind, always the greatest security concern when we do these types of polls, followed by phishing, which of course is typically a trigger for ransomware attacks. Let's see, after that, malware, 45%, unknown data breach, 34%. That's got to be a big concern for a lot of companies. So thank you everyone who responded to that poll question. The next poll question on the screen, and this is the last one before we start our event with our KnowBe4 expert. That poll question on the screen is, what's your time frame for adding new or updating existing IT solutions at your company? If you're on the event, obviously you're always looking to improve your IT security posture. When we talk about security or IT solutions on here, we're really talking about security awareness and security solutions specifically. So I'll give you a few moments to answer that one while I respond to some of these messages here in the queue. Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone who responded to that poll. We do appreciate it. And with that, it's time to kick off today's EcoCast with our expert presentation. And now I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. That is Mr. Perry Carpenter, Chief Evangelist and Strategy Officer at KnowBe4. Perry, it's great to have you on. Take it away.
Well, thank you for attending this session. What we're going to talk about today is really the kind of the underpinnings about what makes a security program work or be weak. And so we'll really kind of confront some hard truths about the way that the industry has approached this thing that we call security awareness. And then we'll start to figure out what the new normal can and should be, a new normal that actually works and starts to move behaviors in the direction that are going to reduce risk and increase strength for security. And so let me set the stage. As we think about security awareness, here's the trap that most organizations have fallen into over the past several decades, is that they have just kind of told people what their expectations are, which may sound great. I mean, we're all mature adults and everything else, and we would expect that if somebody tells us what our expectations are, that they would just naturally follow along. But the reality is far from the truth. There is this thing that I call the knowledge intention behavior gap, which is all about the fact that when we receive information, we don't necessarily automatically care about that information. We receive it and we might intellectually understand it, but for some reason it just doesn't take root to the point of changing behavior. And if any of you have ever cruised past a speed limit sign that said 55 and you've been going faster than that and you didn't automatically slow down, you have also taken in information and just not acted on it. If you've ever asked your kids to do something and told them exactly what you wanted and they didn't do it because they had an overriding priority or a competing priority, well, then you know that knowledge itself never results in behavior change. And so we have this gap between knowledge and behavior. We also have a gap between knowledge and even intending to do the behavior, because we very rarely underpin the why that knowledge is important. And until we address the why and are able to attach that why to a primary motivator for the person themselves, that knowledge will never really take root and result in action. So there's a gap between knowledge and intention, or between knowing and caring, and there's a gap between intention and behavior. And I'll explain that for a second. There are several things that we know and that we intend to do and have all the best intentions of doing, but for some reason we just never follow through on those things. If anybody listening has ever done something like created New Year's resolutions, you realize that this is true. You've known the things that you want to do, and you've known the reasons why you want to do them, and you even have all the best intentions of doing those, and you create that list, and you maybe even tell your friends and family about it. And then 2 weeks later, the things on that list haven't been executed on. You know, you had all these great intentions, like you're going to lose weight or save more money or spend more time with your family or go to the gym more, or all of these things that are the typical New Year's resolutions, based on knowing the good things that can come out of doing those. And yet in the moment, we all make these little trade-offs and we fall into the habits that we've already had. So that sets the stage. Let me back up and tell you a little bit about me. My name is Perry Carpenter. I've been in security for somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I lose track. really my passion and my focus for about the past 10 plus years of that has been working on the human side of security. And the reason is in a lot of the positions that I was in, I either kind of went out and bought technology, or I was in positions where I was helping other people buy and implement technologies that were all around keeping bad guys out and keeping infrastructure secure and so on. But what we saw over and over and over, and you see this um, in breach reports and so on, is that you can have all the best technology in the world and you can build great multi-layer security strategies and so on. And really just one malicious and really motivated attacker, or one negligent internal person within the organization, can still cause a really bad day. And so what I wanted to start to get to is, what is the heart of the behavior problem that we have, or the way that we think about security and approach security from a human perspective? And then how do we build an effective last line of defense? Because we're great at building all these technology layers in, but at the end of the day, if something bypasses all of that technology or slips through all of those other layers, if we don't have a prepared human to be an effective last line of defense, then ultimately we're a little bit negligent. And so what I want to do is remove um, that layer of negligence that we've had for so long, and build it with intentionality, where we're strengthening that last line of defense, and we have humans that are ready to behave in the right way and to process the information that they receive in the right way, so that they can either make good reasoned responses, or even better, have good habits, hygienes, and reflexes when the thing comes through and they have to respond to it. I work for a company named KnowBe4. All we do is focus on the human layer. And if you were to ask us what our mission is, it really is just to help employees make smarter security decisions every day. That's the end game for us. It's all about the human layer and all about preparing the employee to be an effective last line of defense. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about why behavior is so important. And I think you can already see where I'm going with that. And then we'll talk about some ways to design behavior within your organization so that you can start to get the hygiene and start to get the security outcomes that you're hoping for. And then we'll talk about what to do when your behavior designs still aren't effective for some reason. How do you debug that and start to make changes if things aren't going the direction that you're hoping that they'll go? So if you remember just a couple of minutes ago, that knowledge, intention, behavior gap, there is kind of a set of realities that naturally flow out of that. And these are what I call the three realities of security awareness. The first one is, just because I'm aware doesn't mean that I care. The second is, if we try to work against human nature, we will fail. And the third is that what our employees do is way more important than what they know. So, you know, when you think about it, there's lots and lots of information that we have thrown at us every day, and we just don't really care about it. And your employees are the same way. I mean, when you give them a security policy that has all the right information, all the process that they need to do and the procedures that they need to follow, that's just information for them. It's one more thing. And so we have to find a way to connect that information with real meaning that your employees are going to believe is relevant. Otherwise, they just don't care. And so that is one challenge that we have to overcome. And so I give the example of just going past the speed limit and not caring. And what I have to think about is, as security professionals, if you and I do things like that every day, why would we expect our employees to be any different with essentially those kind of rules within our own organization? Is the difference just that you're the one that did that? Well, that's a little bit arrogant then to think that because you're the one that created the policy, they're going to follow it when we have speed limit signs everywhere in towns that people have signed up to live in states that they've decided to live in, or countries that they've decided to live in. So what makes our rules better than anybody else's when we all bypass rules all the time? What we do really internally is we make a little risk assessment. We look at things like speed limit signs or policies, and then all of us kind of scan the environment around us and say, does this policy, we'll call it guidance, does it match what I'm looking at? Does that provide good input to the situation that I'm in? And if so, then I'll follow that. If not, I'll kind of maybe go by the spirit of it. And if not that, then I'm going to go by the spirit of I need to do the thing that I need to do in order to get the job done the best way that I understand to do it. And sometimes the job, getting the job done might mean bypassing a security control so that they can get somebody information quicker. Their understanding of what their primary job function is a little bit different than our understanding as security professionals. And so they're always going to be playing those things off of each other in their minds. And what I would say is that if there is a gap between your policy expectations and your behavioral reality, then the gap is that your policy is giving information without accounting for humanity and human nature, which leads us into this second piece of if we try to work against human nature, we will fail. And the crux of this is that humans are wired in a very, very specific way. And I'll talk about this in greater detail in a minute. But in reality, we have a lot of things that work against sheer policy and procedure. And humans have some nuance to it that you can start to flip on its head and get some of the behaviors that you're wanting, but you can't just go at it blindly the way that we have in the past. So again, if there is a gap between your policy expectation and your behavioral reality, it's probably that your policy is not accounting for human nature. You're expecting people not to be human in some way and to just process that information and do the right thing. When in reality, maybe you need to put either a better, more human-friendly process in place, or you need to put some assistive technology in place that's going to help people make secure decisions a little bit easier, or you need to mask the security completely to where the most natural thing for people to do is the thing that is also secure. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So when we talk about human nature and why we tend to do the things that we do, I think it's important to look at some of the scientific research. And I've thrown up here a model from a guy really who's the father of behavioral economics. His name is Daniel Kahneman. He won a Nobel Prize for his work in this area. And what he really came down to is that human thinking and human behavior is broken up into these two systems, system one and system two. And system one is very fast. It's very emotion driven. It's built on shortcuts, and really it serves us well a lot of the time because it is this intuition that moves us from moment to moment and just generally kind of guides us to where we don't get bogged down in analysis paralysis or overthinking things to where opportunity passes us by, or where we overthink things so much that we get hit by a truck. And so you can see that in a lot of times, system one just takes over and we react and we get out of the way of dangerous things, or we run to opportunity, or we just naturally do the things that we know how to do effectively because we built great habits behind those. So system one is very fast. It's emotion driven. It's effective lots of the time, but it is error prone because we're taking shortcuts and we're not validating our work in that. And so that's where the danger creeps in. And it is system one that leads us to so many false conclusions or bad results in the things that we're working on. And so what we have to realize is that we're always moving towards system one, because system one governs about 95% of the things that we think and do. And so our natural tendency is to live in shortcut mode and to live in this world of emotion-driven action. In contrast, system two is much slower. It feels like it takes effort. It actually does take effort. We use it for specific problems, but only if we deem it necessary. It's like solving a math problem. It's what system two feels like. You have to want to engage in system two. And it takes a lot of effort. We don't like it. We have to exercise self-control. But when we stick with it, system two is reliable. Now, here's the good news, is you can do things in system two several times methodically, and you can start to build a habit. And once something is encoded in habit, that can become a shortcut, and that can live in system one. So we can start to build and codify things in system two and move them over to system one as soon as they feel easier, because you've built the neural pathways, you've built the shortcuts, and things just work. I mean, a great example of this would be learning to catch a ball, or brushing your teeth, or anything that involves repetitive motion that you have to learn the coordination and you have to learn the action of. So that's what we're dealing with, is that our minds want to live in system one, and system one is error prone. And so in all of our policies and all of our information, our minds are wanting to bypass the rational, logical, slowing down and thinking through things, and move to the faster, let's just get it done process. So here's what system one feels like. If I just ask you really quickly which line here is the longest, your mind and your eyes probably just kind of skip down to the last one, or definitely not any, one, not the first one. First one seems shortest, just about everything else seems a little bit longer. But if you know how this works, of course, all four of these lines are exactly the same length. We just have a little bit of an optical illusion going here. But if I were to ask you to make a snap judgment and just say which line is longest and move off the page, you would have said probably the last one or one of the last two lines. And that's just the way that we work. We're always making these little snap judgments based on things that seem to be real, but which may not be real. It's just a perception type of issue that we have. Now, here's what system two feels like. If I were to say solve for x, 532 divided by 86 equals x, well, you probably just naturally felt your mind revolt a little bit against that and rebel and say, I don't want to do that. If I do that, I have to get out a pencil and a piece of paper. And even if you were to take out that pencil and piece of paper, I bet that your mind would try to revolt again and say, oh, I bet we can round some of those numbers down, and we'll take 532 and make that 530. We'll take 86 and make that 85. We'll divide those together, quickly try to get a result, and then figure out how to deal with the remainders. So you're always pushing yourself. Your mind is always wanting an escape route to get to the easier thing to do. And so here's the reality, though. When you look at this and feel your mind revolt against it and say, I don't want to do that, I would say that is the same feeling that your end users get when they look at an email and you say, I want you to tell me if that's a phishing email. It's the same feeling, because for them, it's not natural. They haven't grown up doing this the way that maybe you have. And so they're always going to be looking for shortcuts. They're not going to be wanting to do it the hard way, the system two way. And so that's the reality that we face when we're talking about building secure behaviors is um, just because they're aware doesn't mean that they care. If we try to work against human nature, we're going to fail. And what our employees do is way more important than what they know, because what somebody does is going to determine whether you have a breach or not what they know, because they can know all the right things and you can still have a breach. Or they might not know anything at all, but just mechanically do the action that you want out of habit or out of instinct, and they might prevent a breach. So you have to keep all of this in mind. Human nature is going to be the thing that rules the day at the end. And so again, what our employees know, yeah, it's important. We have to have things that they know for regulatory purposes and so on, but it doesn't necessarily determine whether you're going to have a breach or not. The doing piece is the key that's linked to a data breach or not. So my question and the thrust of the way that I want to approach things is going to be, how do we deal with the action part of the way that we think about security awareness? And I mentioned on the breach side that there are people that can know all the right things. They have all the right knowledge, all the right information, and they just accidentally do the wrong thing. And so you have to realize that in the scope of behavior and the scope of outcomes, you can have very intentional behavior where somebody means to do the right thing and they have a negative outcome because they just don't act on it. Or you can have people that don't intend to do the right thing. They just don't have the knowledge, but you still have a good outcome because they've got the right behavior. And then also the other way, somebody that really just has a malicious intent for the organization. They may have a negative intent, and their behaviors will be linked to negative outcomes. Or you can have somebody with really just a lackadaisical attitude, and their accidental behavior leads to negative outcomes. So we always have a spectrum of this idea of how motivated somebody is to do the thing that we want them to do and what the outcomes are. But they do move across all of these different areas. And then, so how do we design? How do we take some of the question marks out of the behavior piece of this? Here's one link in the chain. This comes from Stanford researcher Dr. BJ Fogg, who you may have heard about. He's been spoken about quite a bit over the past few years because his behavior model is really the underpinning behind many of the habit-forming applications that are on the market and platforms that are on the market, like Instagram and so on. They're all about driving engagement and getting people to do the thing that the designer wants them to do. And so what BJ Fogg says is that humans are lazy, social, and we're creatures of habit. We're lazy. This goes back to system one, in that we don't like to do things that take more effort than we're hoping that they'll take. We're social in that we are influenced heavily by those around us in the patterns that we see and peer pressure. And we learn by seeing things go on around us. We're influenced heavily. We also like to look good to those around us and to put our best foot and face forward to those around us. And we're creatures of habit. We tend to do things the way that we always have, and we have a hard time moving out of that established pattern. And so those are the things that we're facing. And whenever we design a product, if you're BJ Fogg, or whenever you design a security policy or procedure or have a security related expectation, we have to realize that these things are at play. And so when it comes to your security policy or your security control, you have to think about, how does human laziness work against this? Where could that make it not effective? How could the way that people are seeing behavior modeled around them related to this security process or procedure or control. How does that influence them positively or negatively? And then where does habit come in? Is this something that they've never done before and they have to establish a new habit? Well, now you have to account for that, because that's going to work against it. And so you really do have to keep these in mind, because you're not just sending out information and saying, thou shalt do this, and people will naturally do it. They won't naturally do it. And then here's the fog behavior model. This is really, as I mentioned, the underpinning behind many of the apps that have been most successful out there today. And it's a model that can be adopted for really any behavior that you want to promote. And so the way that behavior works is that behavior happens when three things come together at the same time. Motivation, which can either be low up to high, so there's a full range and spectrum there. And then ability, and things can range from being something that's hard to do to easy to do. And then the last element is a prompt, something asking them to do the behavior. And prompts can be internal prompts like hunger or thirst, or just a general motivation, or external prompts like a billboard or product placement or an email or an app notification. So there's lots of different examples of all of these. Now, the thing that's magic here is that what has to happen is that you have to have the right amount of motivation, and the behavior has to be easy enough to do when prompted. And if when the prompt happens, there's the right amount of motivation and the behavior feels or is easy enough to do, well, then you'll be able to have that behavior actually happen. So by definition, if one of those elements is missing, well, then the behavior won't happen. I can have all of the motivation in the world, and you can ask me, or I can have the internal prompt. Let's say the behavior that I want to do is lift a 300-pound rock, and I could be outside. My kids could be cheering for me. My wife could be cheering for me. I could have all the motivation. I may have just watched a Popeye movie or something, or a superhero movie or something else. I could even believe that I could do it. But I can tell you, I can have all the motivation in the world, and I can receive all that prompting. I don't have the ability to lift a 300-pound rock. All I would get is hurt and frustrated by doing that. Now, if you gave me a tool like a jack or a lever or something else, I might be able to do it. But that's the crux of the thing, right? I can have all the motivation, I can have all the ability, but if something is too hard, I'm not going to be able to accomplish it. The same thing on the other side. If my motivation is low and my ability and the thing is really easy to do, and you prompt me, I may still not do it if it doesn't get over that green threshold line. And so you might say, I would really like you to go check the mail. Well, right now I'm giving a webinar. I'm not going to go check the mail. My motivation for that is really low. Technically, I have the ability to do it. And if I received a notification or my wife knocked on my door and asked me to do it, I could technically go do that really easy. But I don't have the motivation because it would be inappropriate to do it. So in all things, those things have to be working together, and they have to be in the right amount at the right time whenever the prompt happens. So here's another aspect of this. Whenever we are designing for behavior, we have to be really crispy, really precise about the behavior that we want to design for. And we have to ask ourselves, what behaviors within our organization, if adopted, would have the best security benefit for our organization? And you'll usually come down to maybe 3 or 5. Things like being able to reduce phishing, being able to, let's say, do secure document disposal, and maybe things like security reporting, and so on. So you want people to be able to report suspected security incidents, maybe no tailgating and others. So there's usually a handful of things that you could start to gain a control on right now. And then you have to ask yourself, is that a single behavior or is that a group of behaviors? So I mentioned reduction of phishing. If I'm being really precise, which I would have to be to design for the behavior, that's actually 7 or 8 different behaviors in reducing phishing, because I have to have people that understand how to interrogate an email, to look at the headers, and maybe trace some of those back. I have to have somebody that is competent and willing to hover over links. They don't just need to know how to do that on an email client on a desktop or a laptop. They also need to know how to do that on a mobile device. I also need people to not download attachments. And if they do download an attachment, I need to not have them open or enable macros whenever that's open. So all of those are very different behaviors in the mind of the end user. I mean, for us, they all fit under that category of not falling victim to a phish. But for them, that's all one thing. And that's not even getting into things like credential harvesting, which is, once they've clicked on the link, well, now they have the ability to either enter credentials into a fake login page or not. So that there's another behavior. Or what if it's business email compromise and there is no link? It's just psychological pushing that's trying to get somebody to transfer money or go buy gift cards or something else. That's another behavior that you have to train for. So all of those are really important to be crispy about as you start to develop your plan. Otherwise, you'll end up with a false sense of security and unmet expectations. And then when the bad thing happens and you've got a data breach because you didn't build a behavior plan around that other thing, well, then people are going to ultimately blame you because you said that you had fixed the phishing problem or started to build a comprehensive plan about that, but you left a gaping hole. So I'm always willing to jump on the phone and help you think through those kind of things if that's something that you want to plan for. But you definitely do want to think about that category or that umbrella category of behavior, and then you want to line out all the different sub behaviors that contribute to that overarching behavior that you're trying to solve. Right, and then you also have to think about, is this a behavior that your organization has the appetite to take on right now? And a great example of that would be, you might say that you want to address tailgating within your organization, but it could be that you don't have the organizational appetite because a number of your executive team every morning holds the door open for groups of people as they enter the building. And so before you take on tailgating and have big messaging about that and are building measurement plans around reduction of tailgating and so on, well, you first have to deal with the executive team and get buy-in for that and sell them on the idea that that's the thing that needs to happen. So here's the way that you might start to chart this out if you're building a worksheet around building a secure behavior. And actually, this is a non-security example, just a physical example of how would I design for having somebody drink a glass of water. So my behavior is I want somebody to drink a glass of water. Motivation is, well, that person could just be thirsty. So that's an internal motivation. They might want social acceptance. So everybody else is drinking water. They might want to avoid offending somebody offering them water. They might believe that there's positive health benefits associated with staying hydrated and so on. So all of that contributes to motivation. And an interesting thing to see here is that a couple of the things that you see are socially motivated. Remember, humans are lazy, they're social, and they're creatures of habit. You can use a social influence in order to increase motivation. So in ability, you've got a glass of water has to be available or could be obtained with little effort. So you could have a glass of water in the room that they're in or in an adjacent room, but you can't have a glass of water a mile away. That starts to really decrease their ability. Well, the person's mouth can't be taped shut as well. and the person can't be asleep or otherwise incapacitated. So when it comes to ability, you have to be able to think through what are the things that make that thing that you're hoping to achieve either in reach or out of reach. And when they're out of reach, you have to think of things that would either bring that more within their scope, or you have to change the behavior. I mean, if you can't get the ability to where a common person can do it, then you're trying to solve the wrong problem. You have to deal with that bigger problem first, where the behavior is unachievable for normal people. And then the last one is the prompt. So the person either could notice that they're thirsty, an internal prompt. Someone could offer that person a glass of water, which would be an external prompt that also has a motivator tied into because of that social piece. They could receive a prompt from a health app reminding them to drink, and so on. They could get an email, a newsletter, see a sign. All of those are examples of prompts. And so in all of these, they work together. And when any of these are absent, you will not have the behavior. You could prompt all day long, but if somebody doesn't have the motivation, it's not going to happen. You could prompt all day long, but if they don't have the ability, it can't happen. And a prompting, when somebody has all the ability and no motivation, will just make them really, really agitated with you because they don't care. And you can prompt somebody all day long, they have all the motivation in the world, but they don't have the ability. They're going to be frustrated and they're going to feel incompetent. And so you do have to be thinking about the psychological effects that this type of program has on people. Anytime you're asking people to do things and they have motivation, but they don't have ability, you make them feel incompetent. And anytime you're asking people to do things and they have the ability, but they don't have the motivation, you make them feel jaded in a lot of ways. And so be thinking through that. How do you solve for that? The other thing is that we can start to think about the way that we tailor messaging so that we have the best chance of embedding a message within somebody's mind. And we don't have time to stick here for very long, but in the book that I wrote almost 2 years ago now, I go through in detail these 4 Trojan horses for the mind on how we can use things like emotion and visuals and sound and words and story, all to make the information that we're trying to convey more interesting and more visceral, so that it has the best chance possible to be recalled later on or to be felt like it is of the utmost importance. So there's a lot of work that we can do here, and if you just take a good look at the fields of advertising or the fields of storytelling and so on, what you start to see is that these are tools that have been used effectively for millennia. And for us to just kind of release policy is a little bit oblivious to the way that the mind works. Other people have figured this out. We can learn from them, and we need to be humble enough in order to do so. Now, back to behavior science. There's a concept called nudging that you should be aware of and you should keep within your arsenal. Now, this is in addition to the behavior model, and I think it complements it pretty well. And what nudging is all about looking at the available choices that somebody has, not necessarily restricting any, but giving a little bit of a psychological edge to the choice that you're hoping that they'll take. And so here on the far left, you have a urinal. And if anybody's ever been in a men's bathroom, you realize that men have a problem with aiming sometimes, which is just, it makes it for a not great situation. I mean, as a guy, you have to do a risk assessment as you get closer to the urinal and decide if that's really where you want to be or not. But what a sanitation engineer figured out a few decades ago, really, is that he could gamify urination just by taking a little plastic fly and super gluing it in the urinal or etching the facade of a fly in the urinal. Now men, because they're really just big grown-up boys, have something to aim at and they're more motivated to hit the target. So men always had the ability. They were prompted because they had to pee already, an internal prompt, literally. And they always had the ability, but they didn't have the motivation. They were just distracted or didn't care or whatever. I don't even know why. But as soon as that little motivating factor, that target practice, that gamification got introduced, well, then this phenomenon called splashback was reduced by over 90%. So it worked, gave the desired behavior. Here, the next one is making good decisions with respect to recycling. You can see the little psychological pushes here, landfill, and showing the ultimate result of the decision that somebody is about to make in that moment. That's where it's going to land. And look how ugly that picture looks. You see this nasty dumpster disgorging its contents in a landfill. It doesn't look appealing. In contrast, over here on the other side, you have these bottles that's showing you exactly what can be recycled. They look really, really clean. The word recycle is in green, a color representing life and longevity and so on. And really, everything you even almost has like a halo type of glow around it. And so it's psychologically saying, this is the good choice. This is the best choice. This is the choice that feels clean, that will leave you feeling clean. Over here, third picture is from a local grocery store in my area where they're trying to get kids to ask for checkout aisle candy less. And so at the front of the store, they have free fruit. I don't know how effective that is, but you can see the nudge in place. If somebody eats the fruit on the way in the store, they're less likely to be hungry and throw a fit on the way out of the store. At least that's the theory there. And then the very last one, this is a self-checkout aisle at my local Walmart. And what you see here is that they're asking for donations to fight world hunger. And I think all of us want to do our part with a number of different charities. It just never feels convenient. You know, we get a call on our cell phone and somebody's asking for money and we don't know whether to trust that charity or not because it was a cold call. And so we received a prompt. We technically probably have the ability, but we don't have the motivation because the time feels off or we don't know if that's legit. Now, think about this in contrast. You've just put $200 worth of groceries over this self-checkout, and then now you get a pop-up asking if you'd like to give $1 to help with world hunger. Well, technically, most of us would have the ability. Most of us have an extra dollar to spare. We've got a prompt, and now we have a little bit of a push. Something is asking us to do a thing that we know is the right thing to do. And it's asking us at a time that's probably more convenient than any other time. The company has probably been vetted, feels a little bit more legit than some other times. And we also have this other psychological push, which might be guilt, in that we've spent a lot of money. What is one more dollar in comparison to that to go to a good cause? So this is a really good example of nudging at a point of another behavior to leverage and get the behavior that you want. So here's what that could look like in a security context. If you're wanting to get somebody to create and remember a good password, well, on the password change page, that's the best page to start to put all those learnings. Somebody's already going there. They're at a point of behavior. Well, now put in a video that gives them 60 seconds of how to create and remember a good password. Now put a password strength meter in there so that they can get great feedback on whether the password that they're entering is a good one or not. And it's giving them feedback in a way that is visceral, like using these words like not great or good or awesome, and so on. So all of that moves into the way that you're nudging somebody into the behavior that you want, and you're using a lot of good behavior design models in order to get there. And then there's this concept that I call a power prompt. And if you've ever, and I know you have, if you've ever received an email from Facebook or LinkedIn or another social media platform that you're on, and it says, hey, John Doe left a comment on your timeline, or John Doe posted a picture of you, you've received one of these. So this is a prompt that also increases motivation and makes the behavior easy and natural. So in those emails that I'm mentioning, you get the email, which is a prompt. You get a motivation, which is, hey, John Doe left a comment on your timeline. Well, that's information, but what's the motivation? Well, they didn't tell you what the comment was. So now you're curious. And curiosity is like an itch that has to be scratched. And so they've naturally increased your motivation. You've got a curiosity gap that needs to be filled. Well, and then they're also making the behavior really easy. So they want you on the platform scrolling. The easiest way to do that is just to give you a link. So you don't have to open a browser and type in www.facebook.com. And so they just give you a nice convenient link. So you have the prompt, you have the motivation increase, and you have the ease of use on the behavior, all in one quick, wrapped up nugget that's right there. So the question is how do we do that with security behaviors? And that's something that I think starts to become very individual for a lot of different behaviors, and something that's very fun to try to start to worksheet. So when it comes to passwords, it can, start to look like this worksheet again, which is if I want somebody to choose a good password, I've listed out a ton of motivation reasons, a ton of ability reasons, and a ton of prompt forms. And we don't have a lot of time to go deep into this, but this is what I start to do. I build a worksheet like this for every single behavior and sub-behavior that I want to start to build a program around. And then I start to think about how do I increase how do I increase motivation? How do I make the behavior as easy to do as possible? And that could be either training somebody more, it could be putting them in the right context to do something. It could be thinking about the time of day that they're in, or time of month or week or year or so on, because some things are seasonally easier to do. It could be bringing different tools in and so on. And then what does my prompt look like? How am I prompting them? Where am I prompting them? How often? What different channels? Are they actually seeing the prompts that I put out? And so on. And here's what this looks like. When you think about this from a marketing perspective, I'll have different messages all reinforcing each other, going out over different channels, from newsletters to learning management system modules to executive messaging and so on. And then over periods of time, if I'm training a behavior, ultimately what I want to do is build secure reflexes. And so I want to train that like I'm training at the gym, where going once a year isn't enough, going once a quarter isn't enough, but going a few times a week, you're going to start to see results. And so when it comes to things like simulated phishing, what the data show is that if you're doing that around once a month or even more frequent than that, you're going to start to see results. And so anytime we're training behavior, we want to think about what's the optimal frequency or pattern for training that behavior so I can reinforce it the right way. Because again, information alone doesn't do it. I've got to start to figure out what's the optimal way. What's the optimal way to train for the behavior, so ultimately I can codify that behavior and move it into system one so it happens naturally. And then how do we debug? Well, the first thing is to realize that you have people in all these four quadrants. So here's a revisit of the fog model. And what I did is I broke this out into four different areas of people that are easiest to target. Well, you have people who naturally have the right amount of motivation and the right amount of ability for just about any behavior that you want. If they're not doing the behavior, it's simply that you've not asked them, or you've not asked them in a way that they see yet. And so you just have to find the most effective prompt for those people, and you'll automatically get them to do the behavior. You also have a number of people who have the motivation to do the behavior that you want, but the behavior feels or is too hard. And if it feels too hard, you just need to give them the right amount of education and know-how, or have somebody come alongside them and mentor them, and that would push them over the line, so where they have the ability. And when you prompt them, they can do it. Or if they have all the motivation in the world and they still don't have the ability, well, then maybe there's something wrong with the way that you set up the scenario, and you need different technology to help facilitate that, or something else. And then lastly, you've got people that don't have the motivation and they don't have the ability. And that starts to become something that's a very serious problem to start to answer, because you're neither equipping them nor do they care. And so you have to start to figure out how to solve for one of those two pieces before you can expect any result at all. And so here's what debugging looks like if you were to do it in the right order. So the first thing that you want to do, and I put these in this order because motivation is the thing you want to address last, because motivation is so individual that it's a little bit chaotic to say, if I do this, it will fix motivation for everybody. But you can start to ask questions like, are we prompting for the behavior? So you solve the B equals MAP, you start to solve that in reverse. Let's start with the prompt, figure out what the prompt looks like, figure out if that's effective. Do we need more of those? Do we need to disperse those over different channels? Do we need different wording? So on. Do we need to build a power prompt? What's the ability? Is it still too hard? Do we need to add different tools in play? Are there times that the behavior feels easier? So you start to think about all the things that would affect the ability factor. And then only after you've done experiments around those two do you start to think about how you deal with motivation. Because again, motivation is so individualistic that you'll waste a lot of cycles if you try to solve motivation first. You have a lot of low-hanging fruit with the other two elements. All right, lastly, I'm going to end off with this and then see if we have any questions. We have to be realistic when it comes to behavior. And we have to design for behaviors with reality in mind. And so when we think about the larger issue, I could very easily say, hey, I'm going to create a behavior model for password management. I showed you a little worksheet for that before, where I said, hey, let's create a behavior model for helping people create and remember a good password. In reality, though, that would probably be a futile exercise, because what we know is that, and I can say this with a straight face because I'm not a vendor, I'm not working for a vendor that sells password management products or anything related to passwords. We work on phishing, so I very decidedly said, let's talk about this other problem because I have no vested interest in the solution. But let's think about human nature. We can only remember a certain number of things effectively. What the data shows is that most people are having to deal with upwards of 200 accounts now. And if my policy says you need to create and remember passwords and have good password hygiene on every account, I am now expecting people to create and remember 200 distinct good passwords, because you can't share passwords between accounts, you can't write them down, you can't do anything like that, right? Is that realistic? I'd say no, it's not. We cannot do that. We're not built that way as humans. And so when we design for the larger issue, I have people that have great motivation and I'm prompting them. Let's assume the best there, right? The only way to start to fix that is to bring in tools. And that would be a password manager tool like LastPass or KeePass or 1Password or so on. Something that can help them, that will create and remember good passwords for them. And then you reduce the passwords that person needs to know down to 1 or 2 or 5, critical systems or so on. That is reasonable. What's not is saying you have to remember 200 great passwords. That's not reasonable. So when we design for behavior, you have to look at the reality of where the human is sitting and think of that entire ecosystem, solve for the behavior component that can be solved for, and then when you need to, bring in additional technology controls and features that will help solve for the rest of that. And with that, I am done. I'll put in a shameless plug for my book because it has a lot of this and more in there, including how to deal with executives and all of that when designing your security awareness programs, and some great interviews with other practitioners and other vendors around the world. And with that, I'll stop for questions.
Excellent presentation, Perry. This is really mind-blowing stuff. I mean, I bet a lot of people out there, including me, never really thought about the mind choices, the choices that people make, the psychology of this to get people to make better security choices when they analyze emails that come into them. So I'll have to check out your book as well. Thank you for mentioning it. And with that, let's kick off our Q&A session here. The first question that I see that came in, they're asking is there a way to measure this kind of behavioral change that we're talking about?
Yeah, so if I'm being self-interested, I'll say that we at KnowBe4, as long as a number of other vendors that work on phishing, have some very good mature models on measuring change of behavior when it comes to phishing simulations, which is why this market and these products are very successful, because that's a very concerning behavior, and we can show reduction of that behavior over time. So that's a good one to start with. But let's take something harder for a second, something that seems more amorphous, something that lives in the physical world, even like getting people to shred documents appropriately and to dispose of confidential data appropriately. We all face that problem where we're afraid that people have secure documents just in their regular trash bin under their desk. If I want to increase use of the shredder, well, then I could build a behavior model. I could build tracking around that. So I build my campaign, and then if I want to track that, of course, before I launch my campaign, I would think about, what does success look like? Well, that would be people shredding more. So before I launch my campaign, the first thing I want to do is assess how much or how often the shredding bins are being used. I could do that by simply weighing the shredding bins a couple times a week. Before I launch my campaign, I could get a baseline for what the average weight of a shred bin is in a certain area. Then I could launch my campaign, and a week after that, I could measure through weight or assessing the volume of what's in that bin. And if the weight or volume is increasing, then I'm probably having an effect. And then I tweak my program a little bit more. If it's not increasing, then I debug the behavior. I start to look at the prompt. Are the prompts in the right place? Are they being done in the right way? Am I working on the ability factor? Am I making that easy enough? Maybe I need more shredding bins. Maybe I need to put them in different places, and so on. And if not, then move to that last factor, that motivation piece. But that's how I would do it. I would start by thinking about what in the physical world correlates with what success looks like, and then figure out what's the easiest way to measure that, or what's the most effective way to measure that.
Fascinating. Really cool. Excellent. All right. Next question. They're mentioning, here that executives, they want access to all resources. They want nothing to slow them down. Do you have any recommendations for dealing with executive privilege?
Yeah, that's a hard one to unlock. I do spend quite a bit of time in the book talking about working with executives, but let me give you a quick way to think about it. And this came out of my work at Gartner. Anytime we're trying to sell something to executives, I think you have to hit their primary motivators. And an easy way to do that, because motivation does change from individual to individual, is kind of hit all three of the major motivators. So we think about efficiency, effectiveness, and business enablement. So efficiency is doing something that will help save time and money. So if you talk about security awareness, well, saving time and money means having less downtime, being more effective when it comes to the way that people produce things and so on. So if I can increase efficiency in any way, or if I can alleviate a concern that the executive has about their people spending time in security awareness. Let's say we'll target training effectively so that people aren't being trained on things that are not relevant to them. Well, then that's increasing efficiency. Effectiveness is all about being more secure. So if you're increasing the security effectiveness of something, you talk about the benefits of that, and the spillover effect that has for the organization, reducing regulatory burden, and so on. And then this last one is really good for executives that just don't care about any of that, and that is business enablement. And business enablement is getting to why the security decision that you're trying to evangelize or the security behavior that you're trying to evangelize will help move the business forward and make the business more productive and more effective in the long run for customers. And that may mean increasing customer trust. That may mean getting systems in place that ultimately help your business transform and become much more effective at this new thing that you're hoping will be adopted, and so on. So as long as you can tie the behavioral benefits or the security benefits of your program to one or more of those things, then you'll start to have a way of having a good conversation that's productive with those executives.
Awesome. All right, great advice. Next question, do you think that security behavior needs to be reinforced with hard actions or with soft approaches?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of getting to the carrot versus the stick idea. 99 times out of 100, I'm going to go for the carrot and go for very soft approaches because people do not like to feel like they live in an authoritarian regime, and they're going to rebel against that unless it's done in ways that are consistent and effective. And most organizations are not good at consistency and effectiveness because what you end up with is a class system for the way that things are enforced. People don't like that. So I'm always thinking about how do I build positive reinforcement in? How do I gamify things? And how do I make things fun for the people that are there? So building contests and other approaches. And when you see somebody going off the rails, you want to approach them out of concern, kind of like a concerned parent or friend or sibling, not like somebody that's wagging your finger in their face saying, you're so bad at that. Why are you so bad at that? And so it's all about kind of creating this shared mindset of community within the organization rather than a shared mindset of shame.
I like that gamification model, that reward model. Great advice. Next question, have you seen behavioral research that really highlights the benefits of real life simulations over education, like classrooms or CBTs?
Anytime we start to put somebody in a simulation, if the simulation is good, actually, even if it's vivid enough to the imagination, if you're just describing it and somebody's closing their eyes and putting themselves in a scene, there is much more of a visceral mind response to that than something that feels like you're just spilling out information and logic. So, I mean, you can start to build this into things that don't feel immersive. So I'm not saying you have to go full on virtual reality or augmented reality or other simulation, but you could do simple tabletop exercises with your people. You could do role playing in your team meetings where you just ask a question and say, hey, team, what would happen if, or what would your response be if X happened? You know, close your eyes, imagine yourself in that situation, all the chaos that would be going on. How would you respond to that? And when you get somebody when they're not actually in that situation to kind of put themselves there for a minute, it's kind of like all this research that's been done around people that can learn piano better by kind of practicing in their mind before they touch the keyboard, and they actually, you know, show effectiveness. That there's an effective learning path that comes with that. Same thing with these other things, because what you're getting is you're starting to build neural pathways around the way that they approach those certain situations. And if they come back and they tell you, hey, I would do this, and it's just wrong, you've allowed them to fail safely. And you have the chance, again, not to shame them, but to build some gentle correction into that and say, hey, let's think about it like this. And now imagine yourself doing this. What would that be like? And so they can start to safe pattern. Of course, if you can do VR and AR and gamifications and put people in those more visceral environments, well, then that's good as well.
All right. Well, it looks like we've covered all the questions here that have come in, but it's been really fascinating having you on. Really cool presentation, Perry. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. I've just brought up the poll question on the screen that says, what additional information would you like about the KnowBe4 solution? And I encourage you to answer that poll. I'll leave that up while I announce the winner of our 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. They are Eddie Andreo from Kansas, James Zerwell from New Hampshire, and Sarah Fee from Georgia. Congratulations to the prize winners. Best of luck to everyone. Next time, after today's event, you'll be automatically redirected to our events landing page or homepage so that you can register and learn about future events that we have coming up. So hope to see you on an upcoming event. And of course, before you go, I always want to encourage you to check out the handouts that are there in the audience console. We've got the KnowBe4 social engineering red flags poster, which is really cool. You can print out and hang up in the break room to help make your employees more security aware. You have the ebook on how to fortify your organization's last layer of security, the white paper on empowering your human firewall. There's a link there to the domain spoof test, the phishing security test. And if you go to knowbe4.com, you'll find just a ton of other resources, many of them completely free. KnowBe4 does a great job of posting completely free resources to help educate the world on how to be more security aware. We are a KnowBe4 customer here at Actual Tech Media. I use it every month to keep up to date on what I need to be aware of when it comes to phishing, vishing, all sorts of malicious attacks. So I encourage you to check it out and try it out. This was really educational today. Thank you for all the great feedback from everyone out there. Shelby said, KnowBe4 has always good info to share. Thank you. Sandra said, very informative presentation. Brian, great info. Lots of other great feedback. Sarah, thank you. Congratulations on the prize winning as well. On that event, you'll hear from SolarWinds, Red Hat, Nutanix, Progress Software, Rapid7, and GitLab. Going to be a great event. Hope to see you on that EcoCast as well. Thank you to everyone in the audience. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.